Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to the January 2019 episode of ShapingEDU Live, hosted by Arizona State University. I'm Samantha Becker, and I'm coming to you from my home office, and by extension, ASU's University Technology Office. For this episode, we're focusing on humanizing learning. So I want to thank you all for joining us today for a much needed discussion about how to integrate intentional, empathetic, and authentic personal touches in learning experiences and beyond, and foster a culture that makes learners feel welcome, supported, and understood. I'm looking forward to hearing all the panelists' ideas and yours. So for all you dreamers, doers, and drivers, here's how today's event is going to go. Joining us are 4 panelists who have expertise in today's theme. Collectively, they represent a range of roles in shaping education. And in just a moment, they'll be introducing themselves. And while the chat that I think many of you have found in Zoom is available for free-flowing discussions and questions, we also encourage you to be tweeting along with hashtag ShapingEDU. And again, not to be a broken record, but as a practical matter, I'll ask everyone in the audience to keep themselves muted unless speaking. And this is to avoid the ambient noises and the echoes. If you have a question at any point, feel free to raise your hand or ask your question in the chat. All right, so I want to introduce our panelists here in a moment, but before I do, I kind of want to share some context of a personal experience with regards to this theme. So I recently graduated from an online graduate certificate program where all my courses were online. And so when I think about humanizing learning or a true human moment in an online or digital immersion setting, I think of this experience. It was the first day of a new class. The class was taking place in Second Life. And yes, this was just last year, not 2009. I was taking place in Second Life, and I had created my avatar. I was ready to go. I had dressed my avatar in the most killer power suit you could imagine. And when it came time to show up to the first day of course, my pants were pixelated. And I was forced to walk around the virtual space without pants. Everyone had a great laugh. It was one of those moments, you know, you always have a nightmare. The nightmare, you know, the typical nightmare, it's, you know, showing up to school, you know, and you're naked and you don't realize it, or whatever it is. But the bottom line is it was actually coming true in this virtual environment. But it turned out to not be embarrassing at all, because my classmates, the professor, we all poked good fun at it. And it was just an opportunity for us to kind of get to know each other and let our guards down. And it felt like this really human moment, hashtag second world problems. And it really, I'll never forget that moment. And actually, I'm still friends. Out of all the classes I took, I'm still friends with all my classmates and in touch with my professor from that experience. So may not relate totally to the theme, but as a student going through that experience, it certainly was a vulnerable moment that actually ended up bringing me closer to my peers who were situated all around the world. And this is, you know, your classmates being situated around the world is the common experience these days, and one of the many, many reasons why humanizing learning is so important. So that's my story, my second world problem story. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce all of our wonderful panelists. First up, Michelle Pacansky-Brock.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle. I consider myself a teacher. I started teaching at a community college way back in 1999 part-time, and over the years have kind of evolved a lot professionally. I've changed from an art history instructor into a full-time online faculty development focus, and right now I'm working with the California community colleges at the state level in our California Virtual Campus and Online Education Initiative. And I'm a big advocate for humanizing online learning. And I love the example that you just shared, Sam. So I'm looking forward to unpacking this topic a little bit with everybody.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We're so pleased to have you here with us today. And I was transparently just looking for your website link to post in the chat, which I'll do momentarily. Tom, over to you.
Gee, I don't even know what I am right now. At the moment, I am teaching, but I'm also do a lot of consulting work around learning spaces and things like that as well. But I've also been doing an awful lot of things around empowered learning lately, including actually trying to do it in my classes in a very explicit way. I have a book coming out in the fall called Discovering Digital Humanity, which is about helping people understand the relationship with technology. And what else? Helped design the West Houston Institute for Houston Community College, which is a student-centric building, and it's very I hate to use the word innovative, but it's designed to spur innovation, facilitate innovation. Back to you, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. And if I could just ask our master graphic facilitator, Karina Branson, to share her screen, because I know she's got some live sketching going. So I should have said from the onset, Karina Branson is here with us today, and she will be graphically representing all of the ideas that come out of this experience. And so thank you so much, Karina. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself after our panelists. So you're in the queue, and over to you, Jess Knott.
Hi, everybody. I am Jess, or Jessica Knott, from Michigan State University. I am the head of Learning Experience Research and Professional Development for the Hub for Innovation in Learning and Technology, and I cannot get that out in one breath. I'm a little relieved that this is an online meeting because my pants are currently pixelated. So I'm just really relieved that I have the opportunity to talk to all of you today and not have that be awkward for any of us. And I just want to note that a lot of the reason I'm here today is because of the work of Michelle Pacansky-Brock. So I'm just really honored to be on a panel with her and get to learn and share with all of you today. So thank you.
Oh, can I get an amen?
Amen.
Well said. We're so thrilled all of you are with us today. Michelle, we're certainly tickled to have you here. Christine, who are you and what are you all about?
Hi, everybody. I'm Whitney Sanchez in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm the Chief Culture Officer currently at Arizona State University's University Technology Office. So Sam is in her home office of UTO, and I am as well in my home office. I kind of come to this conversation with several different lenses because I have a background in psychotherapy, and when I was in my master's program, that was humanistic psychology was really the hot thing. So I've been looking into humanizing everything for quite some time. After I did my psychotherapy stint, I started working doing consulting to organizations, mostly organization development and strength-based whole systems change. And I'm very delighted to be here. And Sam, I think pixelated pants is your next hashtag. I'm
trademarking it right now.
I think you should. Yeah.
Christine, thank you so much for joining us today. Much appreciated. And now that we've gotten to know our panelists, Karina, I'd love if you take a second to just say hi and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karina Branson. It's super wonderful to be here with you all. I'm just delighted to be a part of these sessions. And for those of you who I got to meet at ASU last year, it's great to see you. I'll be doing my best to capture these things, these ideas visually as we're talking, and this will be available to share afterwards too. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. All right, on to the discussion portion of today's episode. So in terms of our discussion, we have a pretty loose framework. It's around the ShapingEDU action verbs, dreaming, doing, and driving. So the first kind of segment of our discussion is going to focus on the dream of humanizing learning. Then we're going to start talking about how to actually do it and then how to drive it at scale. So towards sort of the dream of humanizing learning, I think it's really important. Our panelists all are coming at this from a diverse viewpoint. So it's going to be important to hear from them how they personally define humanizing learning. So first up, Michelle, how do you define humanizing learning?
You know, that seems like it should be an easy question, but it's so hard. I think for me, what it comes down to is we here in Western society are very much part of a culture that views humans as thinking machines, right? But really, we are really feeling machines that think, and that's actually lifted from a book that I just was checking out. So I'll have to find that author's quote name to cite him appropriately. But the point here is that, you know, the way that we feel is very much part of how we think. The two aren't these separate processes, they're very intertwined. And particularly in higher education, we really privilege cognition and that development of knowledge. And that's problematic, because when we do that, we're creating barriers for lots of people who learn in different ways, and people who who come into our classes with more stressors and anxieties than other people do. And so when we're kicking off a new class, it's really important to recognize that people are anxious, people feel poorly, have self-doubt about themselves, imposter syndrome, particularly for institutions that are serving large groups of underserved students, minority students. That sense of marginalization is really significant. And so it's really important to foster that sense of inclusion and create a welcoming environment. Encourage, design learning environments that include the experiences of your students, the diverse experiences of your students, to ensure that they recognize that that's important to you, and to help make those connections between students before you get to the content stuff. And for my interest particularly, I have a big focus on teaching online and online teaching and learning. In the California community college system, we know that equity gaps that exist face-to-face get bigger when students learn online. And that's very, very concerning. And so that's something that we're trying to overcome through professional development. So supporting faculty and inviting them into a space where they can be vulnerable and take risks and have pixelated pants and not feel like their life's going to fall apart. It's really hard. That word vulnerability that you brought up, Sam, is just such a big part of this. And as academics, vulnerability is like, horrifying. And if we can't get there, if we can't bring ourselves to be a little silly, to be human, then we're not going to be able to make those connections with our students, and students won't be as willing to connect with you. So I guess that's where I'm at with defining what humanizing learning is. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity now, because there's so many amazing ways to foster those types of interactions online. And it's what the research is showing is students want more than anything are those interactions with their instructors. So if you have a course designed really clearly and all the assessments are aligned and all that good stuff, great. But you're not giving your students everything that they need to succeed, because they need you.
Well said. Thank you so much, Michelle. Tom, your personal definition.
Well, I teach every course like I'm Professor Kingsfield. I'm kind of the odd duck here in a way, because I tend to look at things from a systemic view. And as a teacher, I constantly find myself running up against the mechanisms of school that tend to dehumanize students. Whether that's an in-person class or a face-to-face class. And I think actually some of those things are even more dehumanizing online. It's harder to overcome them, because you also have that. I can overcome that to a certain degree in class through force of personality, talking, listening, most importantly, listening. But online, you can listen, but there's that distance. There's no way you're going to get around that. But when I'm saying about systemic things, one of the themes that I have been working on a lot lately is this idea that we are still operating in an industrial educational model, where students, in many ways, and a lot of our success matrix are based on this too, unfortunately, students effectively are widgets that are spit out of the factory system that is education. And my point around this, the larger issue around this is, can we really fix the online portion, or are we just sort of papering things over until we fix some of these basic contradictions about what education is about? And I know that's a tall order, and I know that's a process, and I'm not expecting things to change overnight, but I am asking, or I'm trying to be extremely mindful of all of the ways in which my students are dehumanized in the process of the system, wherever that may be. And grades are a good example of a dehumanizing thing, because you're essentially being assessed onto a generic slate against everybody else. And so that's my big challenge. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be very explicit around empowered learning. And to me, the thing that is most human about people is agency and the power to shape their futures. And I think a lot of times education and classes rob people of agency. And I think that's the root of a lot of the issues that we run into.
Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing that perspective. Jess, I'd love to toss it over to you and hear your take.
Awesome. So when I say I'm the head of learning experience research, to many academics, they don't necessarily think that's research, because what my research is understanding how people understand and feel education as a conversation, education as the outcome of a design exercise. A lot of the work that we do in the hub focuses on helping people design conversations that can get to some of the needs that learners have. So when you say instructional design, I think, and what I'm finding in my research right now is that very often it goes directly to online learning or something with technology. But the thing is that every experience we have as learners right now is digitally mediated in some way. And so we have to think about the bigger picture of learning as an experience that we're not only creating for and with students, but maybe imposing on them. And so I think my definition of humanizing learning has a lot to do with listening and talking and processing. And even a couple times this week, I've had to step back and go, wow, I was really, really wrong there. I'm teaching a class right now, and one of my students is from South America, and he emailed me and said, hey, I'm in this class. Everybody's talking about alignments. What does that mean? And I had to step out of my kind of, American jargon machine and figure out how to explain what alignment was to somebody who's in the field but didn't, use that word in context. So, and that's an online course. So that was a real challenge and something I had never considered before. So I think vulnerability on both sides is very important. And I would define humanizing learning as humble conversation.
Humble conversation. I'm stealing that. I love that. Thank you. Christine, I know that you have a different and unique lens that you bring to this, so I'd love to hear your take.
Thanks, Sam. I will start with two basics that came in through that humanistic psychology that I was talking about earlier. One is that if we're going to humanize learning, and I believe we are in the process of doing that, we are certainly not unified in that process, but there's a lot of effort going on all over the place to humanize learning, which I think is very exciting. That ultimately the relationship between the students and the students, the relationship between whoever is leading the learning, so not even necessarily the teacher, maybe there's a facilitative teacher, that those relationships are grounded in some principles that have to do with a true I-thou relationship, that I'm not over you, I'm not smarter than you, I have some expertise and way to help you, support you as the student to get what it is that you need. I was listening to a story about how in the days where the only folks that were really educated were the royalty, and this guy said, it's not like back in those days the tutor would say, sorry, we've got to move on. We're past time on this subject matter. They would stop and say, we want to make sure you understand this completely before we move on, because you will be Prince one day or whatever, and you will need that. So I know that I also have taught online, and I know that there are all kinds of ways that we're discovering that can make that I-thou relationship really authentic. And I believe that even if you never hear somebody's voice or see somebody's face, you can still feel the energy. It's back to the feelings you were talking about, Michelle. You can still feel the energy coming through if the person who's doing that teaching role is putting themselves in that stance of I thou. And one more phrase that I've carried with me all these years is what Carl Rogers would have called unconditional positive regard. So coming to every encounter with that intention is another way.
Thank you so much, Christine. The humanistic psychology aspect is super, super interesting, and I plan to do more research after this event, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on to our next question. What is the ultimate goal for this approach to teaching learning in the short term and in the long term? So if we kind of break this down into sort of like approachable, kind of some easy steps we can take, but then also some major work that we need to do down the line. So back to you, Michelle, to respond to this one first.
So I guess I started, in my head, I go to the long goal first. And I really, at least where I'm at right now, is the real focus is just creating an equitable educational opportunity and helping faculty in the short term to understand that equity is not the same as equality. Oftentimes faculty will come into this conversation about equity and well, I treat all my students the same, and we're doing a good job of increasing access to higher education, but equity is about being sure that everybody who has access is supported and has what they need to succeed. And so that's, I think, while that might seem like a really big, lofty, long-term goal, we've got to start there every single day, institutionally incorporating this culture of equity into everything that we're doing. And it's really, really hard work. And also in the short term, recognizing how important it is to support faculty, particularly in community colleges. So many faculty don't have support. There are no instructional designers. They're tasked with designing their courses, teaching their courses, a load of 5 courses. We have part-timers that teach at multiple institutions, and that's not just unique to California, but I think that within an organization, we've got to ensure that faculty are supported better, because these conversations that we're having right now are so very important, and people can't take on the world and do all of this on their own. So long-term equity, short-term, really big investment in professional development and conversations about equity, and being sure that as we invest in technology, we aren't investing in technology more than human connections. I think that teaching and relationships should always be at the core of this educational model, regardless of how we're delivering that experience.
Could I add to that really quick and just say that not only, that was a really important thing you said, Michelle, about technology and the focus, but not only in how we select our technology for humanizing, but also to make sure we're not selecting technology that dehumanizes. So, I have a real problem with proctoring systems right now, and I would love to talk to all of you in the chat about that. But, I'm not sure we're to a point yet where we're choosing technologies based on not dehumanizing people. So
I will say that most LMSs tend to isolate students because there's so much of their basic structure that's built into assessment and individualized instruction and that. And actually in my in-person classes, I don't think there's such a thing as a hybrid course anymore, because frankly, every course should be hybrid. But I'm using WordPress instead of the LMS because I want to have a blog that has every student on it at the same time. And so that they can comment on each other's stuff, but that they can evaluate and see each other's work, and that the blog becomes an extension of the in-class community. And I found that WordPress is the best way to do that. But from an assessment perspective, it's a holy nightmare on the back end. So you have to approach it with eyes open. But it's the only platform that I can find that, I mean, really allows us to have a collective blog where we're having a conversation online.
So true. Tom, did you want to add anything with regards to kind of the short-term and the long-term steps to taking this approach?
Well, I mean, my short-term goal in many cases, and I think it depends a lot on the populations that you're dealing with, but I really am trying to get people to be mindful and deconstruct what's going on in their classes, but also in the school in general. And that's not easy, because you have to be able to step back and say, why exactly are we using 101 textbooks? Why exactly are we assessing this way? One of the things that I find incredibly exciting, and that's the optimistic side of the book that I just finished, is the idea that with a digital world you can rebuild anything, you can reimagine anything and reconstruct anything. So the limiting factor there is our imaginations, to say, okay, let's think about this from a purely human perspective, because there's so many parts of our educational system that are a product of the information scarcities of the industrial age, the necessity for mass education to a standard as opposed to mass education to an individual. And those things compete and fight with agency and empowerment among the students. And I'm constantly fighting this in class, because I'm like, well, I want you to do this stuff because it's good for you, because it's, let's have fun with it, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course the question is it going to, are there points associated with this, or that sort of thing? And I'm frank with my students. I actually have these discussions 2 or 3 times over the semester and ask them questions like, if I didn't assign a point value to this, would you do it? And they all pretty much go, no. So, and that's extrinsic motivator, and that's bad for creativity. And so how do we get past that? And that's a big struggle. It's a big thing, but I think it's possible to fix that in the short to medium term if we can get enough people within the systems to think holistically, to step back and to say, we've been doing this the same way since I was a kid. Why should we change this? Well, because we want to do this. This is what the point of it is, and it's not accomplishing those points.
Thanks so much, Tom. I really appreciate that perspective. Question for you, Christine. Where else in a school, university, college setting can the humanizing learning approaches discussed be applied?
Well, at the University Technology Office, we're talking about this a lot, as you know, Sam. One of the things that really heartened me when I came into this role is that there is a sincere, very intentional, quite mindful direction in everything that we do, that this is not about the technology, really. The technology is meant to be supportive. It's meant to help the students learn. It's meant to take some load off that is really not a necessary load for the learning. I've been, so in my role right now, one of the things I'm teaching, I guess I would say, is the basis for all kinds of change and some methodologies for that change to a pretty large group of people at the University Technology Office. And I find that by doing something more facilitated and engaging and participatory with folks, they learn a whole lot more. They just do it. They start doing it. Instead of me telling them, you should do this, they begin doing it because the conditions are there for them to do that. Does that make some sense?
It absolutely does. Thank you, Christine. Jess, what about you? Where else do you think that this notion of humanizing learning could be applied on campuses?
I want to point out something that Tom asked earlier in the chat because it was a really interesting question. But and it highlights the importance of storytelling. And what he asked was, you know, how many of you have ever asked your students to tell the story of their experience in your class? What story would they tell about your class? My friend Angela and I are doing a lot of work around using the monomyth to make students heroes in their own journeys, whether that's online or whether that's, you know, face-to-face or whatever journey they happen to be in at that time. And when I say make them heroes, I mean empower them and help them realize they are empowered to be so. So I think across the organization, I'm seeing so much great conversation in this chat, and I'm trying to keep up with Twitter and the chat, but if we prepare our students to humanize each other and amplify each other, if we prepare our faculty, as Michelle said, if we give them the tools they need to interact kindly with each other, you know, Twitter is a very pleasant experience for me. I am privileged in that way. You know, I'm not attacked for everything I say, but I do see a lot of people on Twitter trying to teach each other how to be kind. What if we could prepare, you know, civilization for how to have productive conversations on social media and things like that. So the question you asked me, I'm trying to land this plane a little bit. I think it's everywhere. I think the opportunity is everywhere. I think we need to start asking people what their stories are and what stories they see. I think we need to start being comfortable saying, I was so embarrassed that time my pants were pixelated. How do you feel? What's your most embarrassing moment? You know, like, get comfortable with that discomfort so that we can see, you know, I used to just look at Michelle and be like, oh my God, you know, she's so smart. Oh, she's so scary. She's the nicest person ever. So how can we create like this ecosystem of, I don't want to say kindness, but, you know, how can we prepare each other as colleagues, as students, as coworkers? Christine mentioned you know, how can we level this playing field? I think that starts in organizations, and I think it starts in grassroots initiatives as well. So.
Can I add on one thing? I'm sorry, yeah, okay. I think this builds on to what at least it builds on in my head, Jess, but I also hope that we, and thinking about Twitter and the same kind of kindness that I see, and the community on Twitter is amazing, you know, trying to encourage each other to engage in self-care, to engage in self-compassion. Those are such, you know, fluffy terms, but they're so important, you know, to recognize when you've got that voice in your head that you did something stupid and that's all you can think about and you wish you could go back and redo it, you know, forgive yourself and let it go. That's so hard. But again, going back to what Jess said, the more we can all kind of collectively recognize that we're all humans, we all go through this stuff, we're all just people, it does create a culture of kindness. It really does. And, you know, start lifting each other up as we move through our daily experiences.
I'm so happy you brought that up, Michelle. And, you know, I want more from the panelists, only because I thought about, you know, an embarrassing Twitter moment and this idea of kindness and perspective. The day I found out I was pregnant in 2016 was the same day someone tweeted at me that something I wrote was a dumpster fire. And so it's one of those situations where at the time I'm just like, well, I have other news to be you know, grappling with and excited about. And it put things into perspective, but it also made me think for future interactions, it just reminds you, like, everyone has a story that you can't see, right? It's sort of like this iceberg experience. You only see the tip of the iceberg. There's so much complexity happening underneath the surface of all of us. And so I think part of that kindness is just practicing empathy and recognizing that we all have a million stories that'll warm your heart, and we all have a million stories that will break your heart. And so just recognizing that we all are in it together in solidarity, and, you know, the way that we treat each other, you never know who's having a bad day, who's having a good day. It shouldn't matter. Just respect and kindness all the time.
Review the chat a little. Earlier we were talking about, Tom made a joke about imposter syndrome, and, you know, me being helpful, I was like, there's no such thing. And people chimed up and said, well, you know, intellectually we know that, but we also feel this way. And I had to tell Heather Hazley is on the call right now, and she's one of my Jiminy Crickets. You know, she sits on my shoulder and kind of helps me contextualize my world sometimes. But I told her right before this, I was pep talking myself, listening to AC/DC. You belong here, Jess. I still start saying a brownie. I start saying a brownie before I came here. But, I think we all do that, right? So Michelle, Sam, you guys are great. Tom, I'm having a great day.
I can't even believe we're over halfway through our hour together. So what I'm going to do to keep us moving, this is just wonderful. I wish this was like a 5-hour event, but just kind of moving on to the next portion of our discussion, which is moving on from the dreaming to the doing. I'd love to ask you guys to be thinking about what is the role of the leadership, faculty, instructors, and even next generation bots. I know, we're talking about technology and humanizing learning. Can I hand that over to you, Tom, first?
Oh, okay. Well, so leadership needs to set understand this idea of, again, the digital age and the idea that we can rebuild and reshape everything. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around because, when you're used to spending $100,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 on an LMS or going to all of this, what I call big iron technologies and stuff, it seems like every decision is very weighty. And so, look for opportunities to do small things, because a lot of times the real wins in this happen on very small levels. One of the really cool things about a makerspace is that you can go in there and you can fail without it costing a literal arm and a leg. And the same thing is true in our digital classrooms. I think, if things mess up, then you pivot. And the other thing that's different as far as, faculty is getting away from this whole, if you step away from the whole content thing and being totally focused on that, and instead have the students come to the content rather than trying to shove the content down the student's throat, you will discover you have a lot more time in class for humanizing activities. And, there's some content I just go, you know what? I could sit here and talk about it, but nobody's going to get it. So, nobody's going to retain it. So what am I doing with my time? The classroom needs to be thought of as a community and treated as such, as opposed to me standing up there at the front and waving my arms around, which I can do just perfectly fine, as those of you who know me know. But that's not the point. The class isn't about me. And the same thing is true. Every college needs to take a wake-up pill, and because it's really easy as an administrator, especially the further away you get from the students, and I've done both jobs, to become disconnected from that human thing and make decisions which ultimately dehumanize your faculty, your employees, and your students without even realizing what you're doing. And technology should humanize people, not the other way around. And that should be your basic criteria and your basic understanding of that. And by the way, an organization is a technology, and you have to realize that too, and that it creates outcomes, and it's a machine just like anything else. And so you have to build that technology as well to support humanity. And the thing that digital gives us in that regard is the speed of information flow and the potential for transparency, which wasn't the case back in the old days. In the old days, the guy who had the file was the winner, right? Nowadays, in theory, you should be able to share that stuff around so that people can grow and learn off of other people's ideas, which is what, in theory, we're teaching our students to do too. So.
Thanks, Tom. I'd like to toss this over to you, Michelle, to talk about your concept of transformative leadership in this capacity.
So, yeah, we need more transformative leaders. This word leader is, I think, such a problem today. When the word leader is used in the organizations that are part of the systems close to me, we think of people in senior roles. That's not what a leader is. A leader is someone who is invested in making change, but doing so by connecting others to the why behind we need to make the change, and by modeling what that change looks like and how to do it. And we need more people like that. And one of the concerns that I have is that people oftentimes, and you can disagree with this or not, but from my sense, oftentimes the roles of senior employees, I'll say, on campuses are designed to be management positions. They're designed to manage and control and enforce policies and those sorts of things. And that's a problem because everybody needs to have the freedom to transform. And so there's this also, sense of security. I work with faculty up and down the California community college system, and we try to encourage them to do something like use Twitter to connect with educators and other campuses, and don't feel like you just have to, go to a workshop on campus to learn. And there is this degree of, concern, sense that they kind of need permission to be able to be an academic on Twitter. And so that goes back to this, we're all in this together. And some of the most interesting and innovative cultures that I've seen within higher education are those that have leaders that are out there, that are modeling how to interact on Twitter and how to be a transformative leader out there. Also on campus, it's not all about Twitter. It's just kind of my frame of reference at this moment. So I guess that's what I mean by transformative leadership. And that's a problem that I see. It's a really big deal now. There's a big difference between managing and leading. And we need more leaders. You don't have to be in a senior position to be a leader. Everyone has a seat at this table today. And every single one of us has the ability to transform and make change.
Thank you, Michelle. Christine, you want to do any ripping on this concept of transformative leadership?
Sure. I am appreciating the differentiation between positional leadership that has a title to it and leading from inside out, more or less, that we all can go first on something. And I find that in my own life and in almost all the work I've done, either as a therapist or consultant, or now in my role as the Chief Culture Officer, it's not so easy to change. And people want to change. I would say everybody I work with, honestly, has this good heart, and they work to be kind. But people have these things called personalities and egos. And so in the midst of very intentional work we're doing to change things and align to a set of values and the positive core that we've created, that doesn't mean it just happens because we want it to. It means that many of us have to do some personal work and get ourselves much more conscious about the places when we go over the line. And someone said earlier, this thing about being able to, it's about being vulnerable and being authentic and able to model that it's okay to fail, it's okay to screw up. And if we hurt someone, to be sure to apologize, but do more than that, change something so that it doesn't happen again. So I'm making the point that definitely there are systemic issues that we need to address. I don't believe that organizations or universities are machines. I really believe they are organisms, and we have a collective intelligence that we can tap. We're just beginning to get there on that level of understanding how to bring the wisdom of the system forward.
Thank you so much, Christine. Jess, anything to add before we move on?
Well, that just really got me thinking in that, I both agree that organizations are organisms and that they can be seen as a technology in themselves. And this is fascinating. This is something that's going to keep me thinking. But I just lived this, and it was, I'm a performer. I had been on this assistant director track. I'd been following it. I do all the right things. I'm getting, exceeds expectations on all my stuff. And suddenly I'm in the hub, and we're all flat, and we all report to one person. And this was really hard for my team to go through because, they're used to reporting to me, and I'm used to being a manager. And suddenly like, I mean, I had several meetings where I was like, oh my God, am I demoted? What does this mean? You know, and Jeff Grable from the Hub, I mean, he and Brendan Gunther must have the patience of, I don't even know, but they, you know, walk me through it. Like, leadership isn't that you're a manager. Stop, just stop, you know? So thank you, Christine. Those thoughts really are gonna stick with me for a long time. And I hope maybe we can continue this conversation later. Because I'm still processing this, and it's wonderful now, but for a couple of weeks it was hard.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
can I add to that? Or so I don't think organizations are necessarily mechanistic. I do think, but there's a difference between. To me, technology can be a living and breathing thing too. To me, the machine part of an organization is the process of information exchange within the organization, and how effectively good ideas are promoted, and how people can come together around diverse ideas and build new ideas and things like that. And in that sense, that it is, in my mind at least, very much a technology. And where does that leadership come from? Does it come from people in the middle and the bottom like Michelle, or does it come from the God on high and sent down as received wisdom and so on and so forth? I mean, I think as a leader, your number one task is to facilitate your team, not to impose your I'm smarter than everybody else on everybody. But I wanted to make it clear that that's how I think organizations are technology, and how we set them up is a mindful way, just like building a car engine. We set them up in certain ways that generate information flows and generate centers of power that can either be close to the students or far from the students. And the most effective colleges and universities are close to the students, which usually flows through the faculty. But so.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing, Tom. I think, you know, humanizing learning is a really exciting topic, but what helps, you know, to make it more concrete is to be aware of all the pilots, programs, courses, and other kind of experience that are really exemplifying this humanized approach to learning. And so I'd love to invite our panelists in a moment here to kind of share about any personal examples or things that they've experienced or personally helped lead. But at the same time, I would like to invite everyone in the audience to be thinking about humanizing learning experiences that they've either spearheaded or been a part of or collaborated on. So at this point in time, it's all about sharing your examples to seek to make this idea more tangible. And, you know, it really, really helps carry forward the definition into action. Panelists, any of you want to start by sharing an example of this in your own work? Or a work that you've observed?
I can share a little bit about what I'm doing on the professional development side. I've been fortunate to be able to, I think, move around into different organizations. And when I was working at CSU Channel Islands, I designed a professional development course for faculty called Humanizing Online Teaching and Learning. And that was made adoptable to other institutions, and it's kind of spread to a couple of different colleges across our state. And recently, a year and a half ago, I moved over into the California Community College system and have had the opportunity to design another humanizing online learning course for faculty. And so that course is part of a bigger framework for professional development for preparing faculty to teach online. But there's something really interesting about that particular course. And we find that faculty come into that course with this mindset of, I don't want to teach online because the technology will get in the way of me and my students. And then when they're immersed in an environment, when they're in a course that's facilitated by a caring, empathetic, engaged instructor, which is the way that course operates, they start to understand how it feels as a student, and they start to understand why it is so important to cultivate those connections between the instructor and the student. I had part of that course, what the faculty learned to do is lots of different things, like how to record a video with a smartphone and export that video to YouTube and caption it in YouTube and then embed it in Canvas. So that's a really simple thing. They learn how to use different technologies like Adobe Spark Video to create video stories that actually don't show their face, but just has their voice and other types of visuals, which we find faculty are more inclined to use because a lot of faculty are reluctant to show themselves on camera. But we really try to get them to over that hump because it is so important for students to see who you are and to hear your voice and to understand that video isn't something that you use to record an hour-long lecture. These little video snippets that just say, hey, you know, I'm walking my dog right now and just got done grading this assignment. Here's my feedback, that really start to portray you as a real person and that are so simple to do, are a really important part of an online class. And that can be very empowering to a faculty member to walk away from a class with those skill sets. So not only, you know, the experiencing what it means to know that there's someone on the other side that really is there to support you and cares about your learning, but how to do some of these things with technology and learn to do them in an environment that's safe and that, you know, you're not going to be judged in.
The judgment-free aspect, I think, is really, really vital. The come as you are. Thank you so much for sharing that example and that perspective, Michelle. Jess, any kind of concrete exemplars you're willing to share today?
I'm typing my fingers off. So I think I really want to hear a little more from Christine, so I'm going to be very brief, but one of the things that's happening on our campus, Michigan State University, I'm not sure if any of you have been reading about it in the news lately for the past year. We are, it's a hard place to be, and we're all trying really, really hard to break the structures that allowed us to get to the place where it's as hard to be as it is. So our deans have been working on something like a framework, the culture of care. If you go to the MSU Today website or you go to our the MSU homepage and look up culture of care, it's how our deans on campus are rethinking the organization and the way we treat each other and the way we approach different things. So I'll put some links in the window, but that's the most concrete answer I can think of right now.
I love this notion of the culture of care. Thank you, Jess. Christine, examples?
Yeah, in a lot of my work, I found the best container for the learning is a community of practice. So that's one of the first things I did when I got to the University Technology Office was create a design team that basically essentially designed this community of practice that we now have. And we're calling it Culture Weavers. And we have some really concrete outcomes. We're really aware of the fact that the people who are kind of sitting back waiting, saying, really, this is going to be different. I don't think so. The culture is going to get you in the end. You know, the culture is strong. That we need to have some obvious shifts that people can observe and talk about, and stories to tell about things that are different around there. So we're working hard on that. And I think I've been sitting here thinking that I don't know that we can humanize learning. It's like us doing it to learning somehow. I don't know. But there is something about an inherent humanized, we are humans. We are all humans. So keeping in mind that, as you're saying, Tom, the technologies can be wonderful supports, and I agree that technology is not always a machine. I talk about social technologies a lot too. We've got the tools, I think, to take a leap, and it sounds like everybody's doing that. I'd love to hear from the rest of the folks in the room about things they're doing to take that leap.
Yes, everyone, we actually have 5 minutes left, and I think this is a really great segue. It's been so hard to condense this into this expansive conversation into such a short format. I think it begs for a part 2, I hope. Lovely audience, any examples you want to share, or any burning last minute questions you have? Feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourselves and chime in.
well, this isn't my class specifically, but another course where they're doing coding. They were doing videos that were like very simple, showing coding happening easily, right? But coding and learning it is a very annoying process if you've ever done it. There's a lot of mistakes that are being made. And so this program specifically made videos of failures of the professors trying to write code and show
that's great.
work. And that kind of created a connection that helps students feel okay in failing, because even the professors are doing it. So I thought that was a really interesting way to humanize that learning process for the student.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? Or if not, I'm actually going to ask Karina at this point, because she has kind of had the vantage point of synthesizing this all into the beautiful graphic that you see is materialized on your screens. Karina, what's your hot take on all of this? All this humanizing learning business.
Okay, give me a second, because just like a minute ago, the program shut down on me unexpectedly. So I was a little bit distracted there. So let me kind of recenter in the spirit of vulnerability and transparency. I was like, oh, I didn't save it, but it's here.
Hey,
So,
no problem. That's the perfect event and the perfect topic for such an occurrence. Anyone else have any final questions? Or Karina, are you good to go?
I'm good to go, yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
So I'm thinking about kind of what we're hearing, not only in this conversation, but across some of the other ShapingEDU live events, is really these themes of listening and trying to create experiences, digital or face-to-face, where people can build that relationship with each other, and that builds that empathy and agency and vulnerability that we're hearing about today. A lot of themes around faculty and supporting instructors to feel safe and like they have the tools to experiment and learn with these new digital platforms and different things that they can use online, but also really making sure to listen to the students. So really cool to start to hear those themes, and I've just been engrossed in this conversation. It's been really interesting to hear you all riffing and building on each other.
Oh, well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Karina. I think that really is a great closing point to this conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to share your insights and expertise with us, and also to leave us with a lot of questions, a lot of additional questions to grapple with. I, for one, am probably going to be tossing and turning tonight in the best way possible, thinking through some of these themes. So thank you. I also want to thank this audience for having one of the best Zoom chat conversations I've ever seen or experienced, honestly. Can't wait to read the transcript later. Thank you so much for your contributions. I also want to, shameless plug, promote our next ShapingEDU live session that's taking place on February 28th. Yes, our February edition is taking place on the very last day of February. And the topic will be bolstering intergenerational leadership for learning futures. So how to weave in a variety of voices across generations to shape the future of education. It should be a really, really interesting conversation. Karina will be there. I see Mark Fink in the audience today. He'll be there. A whole bunch of other panelists will be there too, and so we look forward to seeing you there. You can learn more about ShapingEDU, ShapingEDU Live, and all related initiatives and activities at shapingedu.asu.edu. This recording will be posted there as well. And let's continue these really important conversations, and we can do so in the ShapingEDU online community. And we can also do so on Twitter using #ShapingEDU. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are.
Thank you.